Well, hello. Welcome back, everybody. Today I am with my friend Eric Ebrahim.
What's up?
You might recognize him. We did a talk a while back about his journey through legalism into whatever the opposite of legalism is. Not legalism.
Relationship, I don't know. Something like that.
Yeah, but Eric's been a good friend of mine for a while. We go to a little dudes group where we talk about our feelings every week. And so I've got to know him pretty well over the past couple of years. And I invited him to talk today about honesty. Is that what we decided on?
Honesty, vulnerability, all that good stuff.
Yeah, because, Eric, he's a late 20s something, mid-late 20s. Actually, you're...
Turning 26 in October.
26, that's right. My goodness. I've been 26 in almost 15 years. That's crazy.
All right, Grandpa.
But, honesty and vulnerability are kind of a big deal, just in general, but I feel like especially for guys that grew up in the U.S., you had a childhood in the Philippines, so you have kind of a different background with all that. But specifically in our world, since we're Christians, what it means to be honest and vulnerable is kind of skewed, I feel, from what the typical American social world looks like. So we kind of want to talk about that today and how Eric's gone from being invulnerable to vulnerable through honesty. And so I guess I want to start off, man. Last time we talked, you talked about growing up as a Christian. Your family was Calvinist.
Or vaguely Calvinist.
Vaguely Calvinist. And I guess for the people that don't really know what that is, would you explain that?
Yeah, so they weren't particularly Calvinist, but they shared a lot of views, very much centered around like the sovereignty of God. Definitely a lot more mental in the approach to God than like emotional. And so it was very much like, let's find the correct viewpoint of Scripture and all that, which is a good thing on its face, but it often lacks a lot of understanding of the emotion and understanding of like will and how those interplay, and can often come off as a very like intellectual like your faith comes off more as like an intellectual exercise than as a deep-rooted personal experience. And this isn't all Calvinists. This isn't to bash anyone. It's just that side of Christianity struggles with like turning it into a mental exercise.
Yeah, that actually resonates with me because I didn't grow up a Christian. I grew up, nominally Christian. My mom was a Christian. My dad was a Buddhist. We didn't really practice anything. So in my household, it's just like, hey, don't embarrass us. Don't get us into trouble. Don't get anybody pregnant. But there were a lot of stringent rules that I followed that were similar to what I perceive Calvinism to be like, where it's less it less incorporates emotion and vulnerability and honesty, and more about building this facade of what you think you need to be accepted. I always thought that I needed to make a certain amount of dollars, that I needed to look a certain way, be able to bench press a certain amount, wear certain clothes. There are very specific, guidelines that I felt like I had to follow in order to be accepted and known.
Yeah.
That was stressful, man. Like I remember I didn't date in my 20s, or often in my 20s. Because I thought, I'm not good enough, and the idea of getting married or even having friendships, like I didn't have a lot of friends in my 20s, but because the idea of having friends and being honest with them was something I couldn't fathom, because the stuff that I dealt with and thought about and that was true and real about me was stuff that I thought, oh, nobody else deals with this because the standard is way up here and I'm way down here.
Yeah, you feel really isolated, like alone. It's like you have to put up this front, but like that this is just a front and like you're not actually that person.
Yeah, and it feels so inauthentic, So I guess I kind of want to pick your brain with that because when I asked Eric what he felt like we should talk about today, honesty was the thing. And I know that your life has changed a lot since we last talked.
Yeah.
Relationships, jobs, school, deconstruction, reconstruction. So I guess I just want to open the floor to you, man, and whatever's in you, I want to come out.
Yeah, totally. I think, like, anytime you're dealing with someone who's deconstructing, it can be very, like, tricky, especially with Christians, because I think a lot of Christians have a negative viewpoint of deconstruction because they see so many people deconstruct and then they're not a Christian anymore. They don't really believe in God.
Well, I think also deconstruction has just a really negative, hostile tone to it normally.
Yeah. And so I think a lot of people just assume that if you're deconstructing, you're just moving away from the Christian faith. And to be fair, I mean, that's kind of what I did. In the middle of my deconstruction last year, I went to therapy and I started like really facing some frustrations that I had with God and with Christianity, with the church, just a lot of church abuses, and just how Christians have really dropped the ball on a lot of stuff. And so I kind of got to this point where I'm like, I don't know if I believe in God anymore, because this picture of this perfect God and this spotless bride, I guess, of the church kind of all faded away when I really got honest with myself about how I really felt about it. And so, like, going through that process was really, really good for me because I got to throw away a lot of the things that I only believed because I felt like I had to believe those things. Like, I think a lot of times I don't feel like God is good. I think a lot of anyone who believes in God, like, wrestles with that fear. But a lot of church kind of squashes that and says, oh, you're not allowed to think those things. You're not allowed to feel that way because God is good. He's objectively good. And it's like, yeah, technically he's objectively good. But when it comes to our experience of him, it's like we don't always feel that way. Or it's very tailored to, you can feel this way now, but not for long. You know, if you feel that way for too long, you're a bad Christian, or you're kind of segmented away. And so just allowing myself to feel frustration and grief over just like the terrible things that happen in the world, you know, like how many people are struggling, suffering, just going through really rough times. And it's like, I live here in America, I have enough food, I got clothes, I got a house and a job and everything. It's like, I'm one of the most blessed people ever. You know, not everyone has had that. And so just wrestling with that, just being honest with God about like, hey, like I'm mad at you that you allowed this to happen. Doing that and just kind of sharing those, like the kind of prayers that you wouldn't see in church, you know, the kind of prayers of like yelling at God for allowing bad things to happen. That, like, God answered that in a way that I never expected, because I thought I had this list of logical demands of like, you have to prove to me that you're real, and why do you allow bad things to happen? But what he actually did in that time, as I was bringing that hurt and pain to him, is he addressed the hurt and pain that I felt like personally. It's like how the church had hurt me. And like growing up as a pastor's kid, any other pastor's kid knows this, it's like you're in the limelight. Everyone is looking at you to be like this example of a perfect child. And it's like, that's not at all who I am. You know, it's like I like to do my own thing a lot. And that does not always look like the well-behaved Sunday school kid. The Sunday school kid. And so, like, wrestling with that, my entire relationship with God growing up was like, okay, I have to go to church and I have to perform for these people so that they know that I'm the good pastor's kid who, like, never gets anything wrong. Or I could just be a complete rebel and do whatever I want, and people are, you know, look at you like,
so
disobedient child.
In the midst of all that, did you ever try to ask questions or try to express how you felt about stuff? Because knowing what I know about you now, about how sensitive of a person you are, I can't comprehend an Eric that wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of that was curiosity was not something that was rewarded in a lot of the churches that I went to. It was like, you have to accept this framework of Christianity. You have to accept this framework of God, or you're wrong. or you're a sinner, you're rebellious.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was not that space for, so like you're wrestling with the idea of God's goodness or God's justice or like anything like that. It's very much like you have to say this answer or we're going to have a problem. And so that curiosity was kind of squashed out of me fairly early on, because I knew like if I don't live up to their standards of how I should live, then like I'm in the wrong for them, and I'm just gonna get like sent into timeout or whatever punishment that they had. So like I was the kid that was like making trouble and then was constantly like being reprimanded. So like, that was that curiosity that I had was not something that was like fostered.
Okay, so that was the template that was set for you as far as religion, the church, and knowing your family. That was a large part of your social dynamic. And I don't know if this is limited to the Philippines, the U.S., but I'd like you to talk about both. When it came to things that prevented you from being honest and vulnerable, what was it like socially? Like when you were in school, peers, people that you would just encounter publicly? Like how was all of that painted for you?
Yeah, well, I found that it kind of put my friendships and relationships into kind of two different categories of like, these are the rebels that I can be honest with. And usually like the rebellious kids are also have a lot of unhealthy mindsets and a lot of unhealthy things that they do. So it's like when I'm with the group where I can be honest about like how difficult it is, they kind of lead me into some not good things sometimes. Or I'm with the goody two-shoes kids where it's like I have to put on this face of like, oh, hey, I'm a perfect, good Christian. And so it's like they kind of, the different relationships that I had, I wasn't completely fully myself. I was either like the rebellious kid who could relate to the outcast, or I was like the goody two-shoes who, like was obedient and looked good. And so I found that like I would generally shift more towards like the rebellious side of things, which put a lot of tension between me and my parents, me and my teachers, me and church and everything like that. Because it's like, well, would I rather be with the people who like the shiny exterior, or would I rather be with the people who see me as broken and are okay with that?
Yikes.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, you said something that really piqued my interest. You said two things, actually. Curiosity was not something that was rewarded. And there were rebels that I can be honest with. It just makes me think about a lot of movie tropes out there where there's this underlying belief that we're just supposed to accept. And the protagonist is always that person that starts to question things. And then they get ostracized. They get, I don't want to say whipped. What's the word I'm looking for? Hurt. They get punished. That's the word. They get punished for it. And like I felt the same way. Again, I didn't grow up in a Christian environment, but I know that any time that I strayed from this, what was the perceived social norm, there was a lot of punishment.
Yeah.
People didn't want to be associated with that because it really threatened them. And I know I grew up here in the South as well. So I'm familiar with the Southern Baptist Christian.
Yep.
And if you, the example that was set for me is that if you question God, it's like, ooh, you're a heretic. You need to go repent.
Yeah, you're not allowed to doubt.
Yeah. And, like, I remember I went to vacation Bible school, and I was like 12 years old or so. I was not a Christian. There was this lady, old lady Smith, that would just go around and gather up all the kids in the van from the neighborhood. She'd take us to church, and she'd give us a roll of pennies to put in the tithe thing. And I remember I was sitting there, and this guy got up and spoke, and I was really bored. But he said something that really stressed me out. He said, if you are only 99% sure, then you're 100% unsure. I'm like, my God, what? Like you're telling, I'm 12. Like I'm worried about my Legos and my video games,
Yeah, that's nuts, man.
And it's like, that set a template that was going to be used for the rest of my life up until a certain point for a lot of relationships, where if I didn't just accept the status quo, if I didn't just accept what people told me to believe without questioning it and gaining that confidence through that process, then, well, I'm going to hell, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy of having a relationship, or, I'm not worth being able to ask that girl out or have something specific.
Yeah. Man, that really ties into one thing for me that I think church taught me, but that God untaught me, was that there was this phrase, delayed obedience is disobedience. It's along that same line of like, if there's a little hesitancy there, then you're not fully committed, and that is bad. And it's like, well, for me, I have ADHD, which essentially makes it so that some tasks that people would find to be really easy can be difficult for me, because it is a deficiency in the part of your brain called working memory, which is the part of your brain that schedules out tasks for you. Like for getting a cup of tea, you boil the water, you grab the cup, you put the tea bag in, you pour the boiling water, and your brain, like, it pretty much instantly puts all of those tasks in that line. If you have a problem with working memory, then those things can get all muddled and weird. And so, like, for something as simple as making tea, it's not that bad. But once you get to more complex tasks, then things get real muddled. And seemingly very easy tasks can require a little bit of time to just look at the problem and be like, okay, like, I need to get over, like, my brain freaking out right now, and I'll just do the task. And so it takes time. And so for a kid with ADHD, it can look like they're not doing anything, but what they're actually doing is jumping over, like, mental and emotional hurdles to get that simple task done. And so how that translated to me as someone who's like, okay, I need to take my time with this, is the fact that I need to take my time with this is indicative that I'm a bad person and that I'm a rebellious, sinful child. And, like, that was really damaging for me in my relationship with God and my relationship with people, because then it's in the back of my head of, if I don't work quickly to keep this person happy, then I'm a bad friend. And so, like, that's anytime that I displease people, because people pleasing is a big thing for ADHD as well. Like, anytime that I displeased someone, or I wasn't immediately, like, gung-ho about doing what I was told, that went straight into, I'm a bad person, like, straight into that. So that made it really tough interacting with God, because it's like, okay, I have this guy where if I struggle with something, he's like, oh, well, you're a bad person. You might not be saved. You might be going to hell. And so it's like, you can't build a relationship on such a hostile person, and then also say that hostile person is the loving God of the universe. Yeah. So it's like, you live with that dissonance. Like, I lived with that dissonance for 25 years of just like, this is the loving, good God, which I did believe, at least in the last few years, when I came back to him. It's like, I did believe that he was the loving, good God, but it's like, there was still that dissonant part of my mind that's like, if I don't do things exactly right in exactly the time frame that I'm supposed to, then, like, I'm a bad Christian. Yeah. And so that was something that I had to really wrestle through with my deconstruction, is like, what does me giving myself time to process things at my pace, what does that look like? How do I work with my own mind the way that God created me to be, in a way that's healthy and good, so that I can get the tasks done that are in front of me and not have to rush.
So on that, you said something really interesting. You were talking about your personal experience, and you were like, well, this is my experience. I've got ADHD. I've got these belief systems that I was taught, but I feel like if I don't hide this away and just aspire to be something that I'm not, then I'm going to be excluded or shunned or just whatever. And man, just in our Wednesday group, or it's 4 guys, we get together and we just talk about feelings again. And it's like, I always thought that feelings were a bunch of crap, Yeah. And I always thought that it was a virtue to acknowledge my agency over my feelings and commit to actions that would just bypass them. And I thought that was a good thing. And in a way it is, because the Bible says that we're supposed to be angry and don't sin, and we're supposed to take every thought captive and be careful of our words. So to a degree, that's true. But when you don't do that and you're not honest about what's actually going on in here and you just hide it away, like this closet back here, it looks, you might assume that there's a bunch of crap in there. It's not clean at all.
Stacked up, yeah.
You know, you guys don't know that, but my wife does. Eric, well, I guess you guys know that now. You know?
Yeah.
And it's little things like that. There was a song that I listened to and was exposed to when I first became a Christian that just really like kind of, this sounds so cliche to say, but it kind of broke me in a way. It's by a guy named Taryn Wells. Fully known. And there's a line that goes, I'm fully known and loved by you. And that just like stuck with me because, you know, up until my life, I became a Christian around 30-ish. I was a hopeful agnostic up until then. Well, from my early 20s to then. But I didn't actually step into relationships with people that knew what love really is. And if you're curious what I mean by that, 1 Corinthians 13 is that outline, right? And so seeing what it was like entering into a fold of people that really cared about what's going on in my closet. You know, like, oh, you deal with this. Okay, well, tell me more about that, instead of, you can't say that, you know? Or, oh man, that's not what society says. You know, you need to clean that. You need to fix that, and then we can talk. Instead, this group of people was like, hey, like, tell me more about that. How'd you feel? Like, what did that make you think? Well, what do you mean, what did I feel? That's inaccessible.
You're not allowed to feel.
You know, error 404. You're like, it cannot be accessed, you know? And so being fully known, I guess I want to talk about that for a minute, because you were talking about how you were raised as a pastor's kid. You had all these beliefs about God where, I kind of think he's good until, and then you have to hide that part of you away. And then there was a lot of pressure. Like when I first met you, there was a lot of, the Bible says this, so we have to do this, and I'm trash, and because I've got these things that actually go on. Like,
good times.
The amount of times I heard this man say I'm trash through that period, oh my gosh. Made me so sad for you.
Yeah. That was bad.
Yeah, so you started off with that belief system, and now you're at a place where you feel like you can communicate those things, not just to God, but the people around you. How did you start that process?
Yeah, I think like a big part of that was Brandon, actually. He's one of the guys in our Wednesday night group. And he, like, just the way that he lives his life is very honest and open about what he's feeling, what he's thinking. He's a very vulnerable man. And so we became close friends fairly quickly when I met him. And just throughout friendship with him, as I saw him be open and honest about things and not really care that he was, like, saying things that a lot of church people will be like, you're not allowed to say that, you know? You're not allowed to struggle with whatever. You know, like, the more that I saw that, the more I was like, okay, well, let's dip my toes in the water. Let's say, like, okay, I struggle with anger or pornography or, you know, whatever. And, like, as I was more honest with him about, like, what I was actually feeling, what I was actually thinking, and he didn't freak out on me. He was like, oh, well, why do you feel that way? You know, like, why do you want to watch porn? Rather than like, oh, you shouldn't want to watch porn.
You know the Bible says that's bad, right?
Yeah, you know, it's
Thank you for sharing that, but don't do that.
Yeah, and it's like, thanks. So helpful.
Yeah.
But like as he like welcomed that space for me, that kind of helped bring me out a little bit. And then we had started the Wednesday night group, and I think that's when it really like that's when everything happened, you know, because I started the Wednesday night group with the guys. And now there's 3 other guys who every week I'm dumping everything out and being like, all right, here's where I'm at. And so having my guys, and then after that, starting to go to therapy for a bit, that really like, that opened the floodgates of like everything that I was thinking and feeling. And so I I really credit my ability to be open and honest with the fact that I was blessed to have friendships in my life where people were safe and loving, so that I could just be myself. And my relationships, the different friendships that I had, allowed me to be myself, and actually saw that God created me in the way that he created me for a reason. And like, my pitfalls weren't some big, huge thing. It was like, well, yeah, God created you. If God creates you as an emotional person, then like that hardline logical thing, you're just not going to be as good at. In the same way that people who are more like hardline and logical are going to have a little bit more time with struggling with emotion. Yeah, and so just the fact that my weaknesses were not all a moral thing, like there were some, and a lot of moral problems, but some was just I wasn't functioning to the best of my ability because I had a wrong view of myself. And so just opening that up was what allowed me to be as honest as I am.
Yeah. So earlier you said that there are the rebels that you can be honest with. But then there are the people that are accountable for themselves. Because, I tend to look at things in extremes sometimes. I think there are those people that go off the rails and their lives are just a mess. And there's people that have no fun, but, they're very fit and have good finances.
Yep.
It's like, if I'm going to choose one or the other, which one sounds more fun, Yeah. And so I think my belief level, at least, was just one or the other. I didn't know how to identify how to stay in the middle of the road. It was one of the two ditches. And so when you encountered Brandon, he was kind of rebellious from the way that you had been socialized to engage in church culture. How did you identify that he was somebody that was going in a direction that was healthy, that you wanted to be a part of?
Yeah, I think I could just read on him that he cared, just in that he listened. That's a big thing, is people who listen are generally people who really do care, like actively listen and are actually trying to figure out what you're saying, and not just listening so that they can throw something back at you.
Yeah.
And so just the fact that when I told him something, he would ask questions that would bring more of myself out, whereas a lot of people in my past who I've brought things out to, they would ask questions that would kind of corner me. In a way where it's just like, I'm going to ask questions until you would admit to how terrible you are. It's more like an interrogation than it is like, but what are you actually thinking and feeling? And so being with someone who I didn't feel like was interrogating me, but actually wanted to know what was going on, like that was a big old green flag that I saw and was like, hey, this is a guy that I want to be friends with. That on top of his vulnerability is very disarming, because it's like when someone comes up to you and is like, here's how I'm terrible, you're like, oh, well, they have no stones to throw at me, and so it's like this person is actively coming in a way that allows me to be more open, because it's like, if he starts throwing stones at me, he's already given me a wide open door to throw stones at him. And so that vulnerability is kind of like a white flag of like, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to share. And that was a really thing that was a thing that I really appreciated about Brandon, was that he threw up that white flag and was like, I just want to know you. And that's changed how I do relationships.
Yeah. So you said that when you met Brandon, he started asking you questions that drew you out and weren't really trying to corner you. They were just trying to figure out what's going on in there. Prior to Brandon, I'm sure all that stuff was still there. What'd you do with all that stuff? And how did that affect your life?
Yeah, I mean, I just kind of stuffed a lot of it, a lot of that negative emotion. I mean, there was a lot of different unhealthy coping mechanisms that I had, whether it be just kind of like locking myself in my room and listening to music till the feelings went away. Pornography was a big one. Like I wrestled with a lot of like self-destructive, suicidal tendencies throughout those years of just like, I'm this bad and I'm alone in this bad. It might be better that I'm not here. Mm-hmm. And that was really, really tough, because it's just like, then the judgment of like, God created me for a purpose or whatever, and here I want to kill myself. Like, how terrible does that make you, that you want to, end a life that God created?
And that kind of just reinforces the belief.
Yeah, and then like it's just that constant spiral of like, oh, I'm terrible because I do these bad things. Oh, but even feeling this way makes me even more terrible. Yeah. So it's like, spirals down. And so like how I dealt with it was like, I reached for anything that could give me any type of pleasure. Like whether it be porn, whether it be music, gaming. Like I didn't really do drugs. I drank. I think I got close to becoming an alcoholic, but I was never what would be officially considered an alcoholic. I just almost got there. So drinking, just codependent relationships, friendships, where it's just like nothing good is happening here. Like we're not actually enjoying each other. We're just drinking together. Yeah. And so different unhealthy coping mechanisms that were not good. Yeah.
So as you started getting around getting around Brandon and all these other people where you were talking about your feels, how did all that start to change?
It was almost like unnoticeable, the actual change. I think it's one of those things where, like, I know you've been working out for a bit, and when...
Oh, you can tell.
Like when you have been doing it for a while, and then you look in the mirror and like you're like a little bit bigger. You can tell like your shoulders are a little bit wider. You can tell there's a little bit more definition. And so it's one of those things where it's like, I didn't see it happening until I looked back and was like, oh, 2 years ago I wanted to kill myself. And now, like, the worst that it gets usually is just being down on myself. And so it's one of those things where it's just a process, a time, like you just look back after 50 conversations and it's like, oh, I feel better about myself now. I feel better about like the way that God made me, and I feel like God actually loves me now. And I think that God actually loves me now. Whereas before it was like, he likes me, but I don't know.
Kind of makes me feel like whenever I'm doing some massive project and I can't tackle it all at once, I get overwhelmed. Like I look at the scope of whatever it is. I'm redoing our bathroom right now. When I first started thinking about that, I was like, my goodness, this is going to take, I don't know how to do this. This is going to take a lot of resources, time, energy, effort. What if I mess up? Yeah. If I mess up, what are people going to think of me specifically? Or what if I waste my resources? What if it doesn't turn out the way that I want it to? And so, like, I just got started, and that's kind of how all this happened for me as well. I just remember, like, I'm glad you said that. Looking back is just, the sum of the relationships is just kind of gradually happened, because I think back to those times in my life. I was just in a room with people and we would ask those questions. I struggle with, like, I remember, one of the defining moments in my relationship with my wife, according to her, was when we were at a potluck and I was honest about, hey, like, I really struggle with social anxiety and it's a big thing for me. And she was shocked by that because she was like, I didn't see that on the surface, because the facade you had on, or what I was exposed to, was this guy that was calm, cool, collected, and had it all together. I was calm, cool, and collected, but I didn't have it all together because that was a facade that was curated over all my 20s, because that's what I thought people wanted. Inside I wanted to say, I'm socially awkward. That way the expectations people had for me were not an inauthentic level way up here. It's like, no, I'm actually down here. Yeah. And it's just, it's weird, man, when you finally get to that point where you could just say that stuff and be authentic and fully known, and people are like, oh, that's okay. Like, what do you mean that's okay? Yeah. I've got this huge problem. That's okay, really?
Yeah. And that's where love actually is, Like, that's, if you go back to 1 Corinthians 13, like love being patient, kind, it's not envious and it's not boastful, and it says it doesn't seek its own way. Just that idea of like there may be like our idea of like what a perfect person is supposed to be, but like at the end of the day, that's our own opinion of like what a perfect person is. But what in reality is a person who God created, who's like imperfect, who has strengths, who has weaknesses, who has moral failures, and like are really good in some ways and really terrible in other ways. And it's like when you just accept the people for who and what they are, that allows you to then your relationship to be based on, I want to love this person so that they can be the best that they can be. So rather than you need to be up here, it's like I'm going to meet you here, and maybe together we can get up here together. And that like that's where the relationship is, because it's no longer about you need to satisfy my moral demands. It's let's be together and let's see what we can make out of life together. And I think that's way more beautiful of a thing. And I think that's something that we're all secretly yearning for, is like, this person accepts me for the way they are, or for the way that I am, but they're not going to just let me wallow in my self-pity. They're going to help me get to the next level and to heal and to become more like Christ and to get closer to the God who loves me and created me in a way. And like, his desire, like the one verse, the will, this is the will of God, our sanctification, like he wants to, like, to sanctify is to set apart something. So to set us apart from the things, from sin, from that stuff that's ripping us apart, like our moral evils and our misgivings, he wants to separate us from that. And so that we can function the way that he designed us to function, in love and in grace. And it's like, that's so much more beautiful than like, oh, well, you didn't hit everything in this list of rules, so I guess, like, too bad for you. Yeah.
Our premarital counselors, one of them spoke at church this past Sunday, or last Sunday. We streamed the previous week. And she said something that kind of made a lot of sense to me. She said that in the midst of arguments, they call it intense fellowship, they've made it a habit to say, we're okay, but the situation's not.
I like that.
And that kind of struck me because I do life and relationship coaching with people, and I like helping people learn how to communicate and reconcile conflicts and stuff. And something that I see frequently is that people have a belief system that if the situation's not okay, then they're not okay, because their identity is closely tied to what's going on. And I think that's how it was all my life too, because I wasn't living up to a certain standard. I wasn't attractive enough. I didn't have enough money. My housing situation, my education, my job, whatever, I wasn't okay. But learning to be authentic, and I've been really happy that this is what you decided to talk about today, because learning to be authentic and just be fully exposed brings you to a place where you can just shed those expectations. You said something before we got started that I wrote down, I thought was amazing. You said, the more honest I am with my friends and God, and how patient they have to be with me, gives me more patience for others. And if I could sum up the purpose of a relationship, whether it's a friendship, your relationship with God, your relationship with a spouse, or a boyfriend or girlfriend, that's it. It's, what have I received from God? How is he patient for me? How is he kind to me? That is going to frame how I interact with other people. So if I'm impatient with my spouse, I must be believing that somebody who's pouring into me and loving me is impatient with me, because that's the template for love that I follow.
Yeah, no, totally. Like, I think one thing that my deconstruction really taught me was that all of my life up until that point, it was about the pursuit of God. It's like, I have to be reading my Bible, I need to be praying, I need to be going to church, I need to be doing ministry, I need to be doing all these things to reach up for God. But during my deconstruction, when I was like, no, I'm not going to church, I'm not praying, I'm not doing any of that quote unquote religious stuff. Then God started talking to me, he chased me down. Like he hounded me from the moment I was just like, all right, I can't do this thing anymore until now. Like the basis of the Christian faith is always that he loves us, and he hounded us and he chased us down so that he can save us and bring us close to him. And so just being honest with myself of like, yeah, like I am super depressed and super anxious. That allowed him to come in and be like, hey, this is why you are, like these are the lies that you're believing about yourself and why you hate yourself. And this is the truth that will fix that, because it's like, truth is, I was believing a lot of things about myself that weren't true. And so that was something that was really, really beautiful when I realized that God's pursuit of me is far more important than my pursuit of God, because my pursuit of God always has to be based on the fact that he wants me more than I want him, and like that develops a kind of patience and love for other people, because it's like God sees me as valuable enough to pursue me despite the fact that I can be really ornery, I can be really impatient, I can be downright terrible. And he pushes through all of that and is like, no, I'm going to get to your heart, and I'm going to do it by any means necessary. And then, like, having received that kind of love from God of, I'm going to chase you down no matter what, then when other people are sinning against me or just doing something that's like triggering or just difficult to handle, then I can fall back on that. No, like, I don't need to be angry with this person. I don't need, like, I may feel angry, and that's okay, because that's just a natural human reaction, but it's like, I can heal and I can love that person through the anger and through the frustration. And so, like, it stops being this pretty picture of Christians as, like, these perfect people, and just shows us that we are, we're difficult. And we're difficult to relate to sometimes. But that's okay, because we're loved. And we can love other people with that same love that we've been given. So, and that's all built on honesty and openness and the ability to not be okay.
Yeah. Well, I want to switch gears for just a second, because I'm thinking about how I felt when I first started doing that, because I had been operating in deficiency of relationship and acceptance and authenticity and honesty for several decades. And I remember thinking, wow, this is kind of nice, and like anybody who's starving, our impulse is to,
Yeah.
So as you started doing that, how did you identify, and I don't know if this actually happened for you the same way it happened for me, but how did you identify when you needed to not take, to not divulge, because you're in a new space? It's like, oh, I'm being honest, I need to get this out. Well, that can also, you can overdo it, you can overindulge that. What was that like for you?
I think part of it's like that pendulum analogy that we have is just like, you kind of have to let the pendulum go when you're really deficient in a certain point, and like allow it to like swing to the point of like from underconsumption to overconsumption, to then maybe find your space of like, okay, this is how much we need to consume. And so for me, I think it got to the point where I'm talking about my emotions and I'm just going on and I'm going on and I'm going on, but nothing's happening. And like sometimes you need to just go on and on and on, because there's a lot in there. But I've noticed there comes a point when I just feel like I'm just talking at this point. Like I've already said everything that I'm thinking, everything that I'm feeling. It would just be repetitive for me to go on.
Yeah.
And so just finding that space of like, all right, I got it out. Let's nip it in the bud. Because at the end of the day, you bring these things out so that you can be healed. You bring this stuff out so that you can get past it, not so that you can sit and wallow. And so when you get to that point where it's just like, oh, I'm just wallowing in my issues at this point, I'm just wallowing in my sin, I can just be like, all right, God, thanks. Thanks for the cross. I need forgiveness here because I'm messed up and I need help.
Yeah.
And then like just nip it in the bud and move on. But you can do that in a way where it's like, it's not denying your emotions. It's, I have all of these things out here and I have all these issues out, but I've shuffled through and like I know what's going on and I can move on now. So definitely, and that just takes time. You know, it takes time and wisdom. So like not rushing that process of trying to get to the bottom of things, but allowing God to be like, all right, we're done. Because I've noticed that he does that, is when you get to a certain point where you're overindulging, that rod of discipline kind of whacks you on the butt and you're like, all right, we're done here. And that's nice.
Yeah, I think for me, at that point, I had to be really careful about attention seeking, because it was nice to have attention, and it was nice to. It's kind of like when you go skinny dipping. You know, I've never actually done that, but I can imagine that freedom that you feel when you get out there, because it's something that a lot of people have never done and that you're not supposed to do in most places. You know, but you do it, and it's like, wow, I feel free.
It is nice.
Right? But at what point am I supposed to rein this in? You know? Because it does feel good. It does feel good to have people listen. It does feel good to have people care. It does feel good to have the attention on you for reasons that are different than what you thought. For instance, instead of saying, oh, the attention's all on me because I'm handsome, or I'm buff, or I have a lot of money, or I have a nice car, or I have a nice house, or I have something to give. Instead, it's like, oh no, that same satisfaction that I get from that attention is on me because I'm just being honest about, ooh, I want more of this. You know? Yeah. What you said, it gives me more patience for others. How do you think that you learn to dole out what you've been given in that way?
I think it was, I think a lot of it was just seeking God and being like, okay, hey, what do you want? Like, what does God want you to do with the relationships and the friendships and the different things that he's given you? And a lot of times it's just start where you're at. It's like, I have coworkers, I have friends, I have family. Am I loving them? You know, like, do I actually care about them? Or are we just people who exist in proximity to each other? And so when it's doling out the patience, like, you know, the people who push your buttons, you know, like, you know, because they are frustrating. And so like when you turn your attention towards those people, it's like, well, why do they frustrate me? And like probably 9 times out of 10, they frustrate you because they're doing something that you do that you dislike about yourself.
Ooh, I don't like hearing that.
Which is like, ah, gosh, no, it's my own moral problems here, you know? And so like in dealing with impatience towards another person, you also start to look at, well, where am I being impatient with myself? And then, well, that's something that you can address immediately.
I guess it's just more comfortable to call it out and see it in somebody else. Especially if it's in a smaller degree. It's like, aha!
Yeah, that's the log in someone else's eye versus the log in your eye versus the speck in someone else's eye. It's a tough one, but I think the more that you see arrogance and pride as the corrosive and awful thing that it is, it really helps, because even though you don't necessarily want to humble yourself, like, not always, sometimes you really, really do, but it's not always easy to humble yourself. It's, you know, the apple on the end of the stick becomes more apparent of how humility and like allowing yourself to mess up is actually really good for you in the end. And you kind of see, oh, like, if I don't deal with this impatience in myself, I'm just going to be frustrated by this person. And who wants to sit around being frustrated
by everybody that you encounter?
It's exhausting. It's exhausting to live in sin. And when I started to realize that it's exhausting to live in sin, then the price that you have to pay in order to shed the different habits that you have that are wrong or just like inefficient, it just looks so much better.
So that begs a good point. You said there's a cost to living in sin, and I used to have, being fully honest, I used to have thoughts of how sinful lifestyles seem really attractive. Because there are certain sins where it's like, oh, that feels really good. I don't see how this is sinful, and people that live in that way, it's like, ooh, I want that.
Yeah.
Just being honest, people that were in pornography, sex is designed to be good and to be satisfying, and to think, oh, this person's living in this world and they're getting paid for it. I used to think, wow, how could that be bad?
Yeah, I've thought the same thing. Yeah.
And having to reframe how I think about that stuff and understand, oh, there's people that are attached to that whole situation, and it's demeaning and objectifying, and it really erodes a person's sense of identity and confidence and value and stuff. It's like, ooh, gosh, I don't know what to do with that. So I guess for you, there's always an exchange. I love Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah,
it's
good.
like every exchange requires I don't know. You guys, if you guys watch anime, you know what I'm talking about. But basically, there is a cost to everything, essentially.
Equal exchange.
Yeah. That's it. So for you, would you take a few minutes here towards the end as we wrap this up? Would you just talk about what it's like for you? What does it feel like to be on the end where you've started seeing this stuff and you started exchanging it, and you're living a vulnerable life where you don't feel as hindered, you feel heard, you feel seen, you've learned, or you're learning to navigate that in a way where you're not overindulging. If you had to, for whoever is watching right now, if you had to describe that feeling, what would you say?
Man, it's like I took a big poop. It's like, oh, perfect. I've been holding on to that for a while now. It's really just that sense of relief, because it's like all of anyone who struggles with mental health and that spiraling, when you're in that space of you're not spiraling, you're not even thinking about it, you're just going about your life. When that starts to lighten up, something that's like, I realized when I started to heal from depression and anxiety is that the colors become more vibrant. I'll be driving and I'll see the trees, and the green of the trees is richer. And so it's one of those things where it's just when you get a massage and you have all that tension in your body and then it's just gone. It's like sometimes you don't even realize how much tension is in your body until it goes away, and you're like, whoa, I was holding on to so much. And now that I have put myself in the position to not deal with it anymore, life is good. It's just that sense of relief and that sense of a weight being taken off your shoulders. It's beautiful.
Yeah. How has that influenced and you listed a whole bevy of things earlier, everything from suicidal ideation to struggling through ADHD, perfectionism in your faith. How did this concept, where you're at now, affect all that?
Man, it completely changed how I relate to God, because when God is no longer that guy who has all these standards that you have to live up to, but the guy who is so dedicated to your salvation and to your healing, more dedicated than you are, it just reframes life in such a way that it's it's natural for us to feel like life is going to get worse and worse the older we get, because you get older, you get more responsibilities, you have less freedom, your body starts breaking down and everything. But with that lifting off of your shoulders, it's like, oh, so I can actually age well. I can be better in the future than I am now. I can be more joyful. I may not be happier necessarily, but I can enjoy life. And aging and taking on responsibility and just the wear and tear of life doesn't have to be a thing that crushes me. It can actually be something that I can take on with optimism and with hope, because God is in those problems as much as he is in the problems that I'm dealing with now. And he's healing me and saving me in the future as much as he is now. So it's it completely changes your perspective on things.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we have two specific groups of listeners that I imagine are watching this. We have people who have a relationship with God and those who don't. So speaking to the people first who have a relationship with God, with this whole concept of honesty and authenticity and being fully known, if you had to give them one thing that you've learned that you think would be helpful for them, what would that be?
Yeah. The point of salvation is intimacy with God, and the only way you can get that intimacy is through honesty and vulnerability. And so, like, when dealing with faith and salvation and morality and everything, like, everything that God has given us is meant to be a way for us to be closer. And like back in the garden with Adam and Eve walking in the cool of the day with Jesus, like that's the end goal. And if that stops being the end goal, that's when you'll veer off into just not good things. And so when it comes to honesty and openness, God's never going to hate your honesty. Like, regardless of how ugly that honesty may look, regardless if it's something that you're really bitter and resentful against God for, like, I've found that some of the holiest spaces in my life are the places where I doubt, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, and I'm bitter against God, and I bring those things to Him, and He loves me through them. So yeah, don't be afraid to be honest with Him. It's so worth it.
What about for people who don't have a relationship with God?
Same thing. Like, honestly, I know, like, a lot of people, you know, are kind of on the fence about God, and you wrestle with, like, why is everything so terrible? You know, like, why does everything suck? And I know that it makes you frustrated at God. And so if you're in a place now where you're wrestling with whether God is real or not, and you find that frustration kind of adds baggage to you, be honest with Him. Be real. Like, when you pray to God, if you pray, just be real about everything that you're feeling and thinking against Him. And do all of that with a heart that's open to receive. Because it's very easy to, you know, lob our anger at someone and then, like, I don't even care what this person says in return. I'm going to stay entrenched where I'm at. Like, when you're frustrated at God and you're lobbing the stones because you're mad at Him, and, like, I've lobbed enough stones in my life that I know what it's like, do your best to listen, because God is not like the picture perfect, like, come down from heaven in a cloud, like, thou shalt not do this. You know, He's actually a very relatable, personable guy. And, like, He's dealt with and healed a lot of things in me because I was honest with Him. And so if you're struggling with that frustration, don't hold anything back, and see what He says, because it might change your life.
Yeah. And something I want to add is that when you think about the sum of your life and all the crap that you've been through and all the crap that you've done and all the mistakes that you've made and all the deficiencies that you perceive that you have, we're all more alike than we are different, I feel. We've all got stuff. You know, some of it is worse in the eye of the social network than others, but there is a purpose for emotions, and emotions are designed to bring people together. Emotions aren't, everything about you is purpose. The way that you're wired, the way you're sewn together, the way your synapses and your brain connect, everything has a purpose. Emotions are that too. And they don't just go somewhere. They exist until you process them and get them out, and, you know, they grow and they become something. And the best way to do that is with other people. I would encourage you to find people who are capable of listening, that care enough to listen and understand that you're supposed to give what you've received. That's just how we're designed, you know? And I think anytime we deviate from that, we break down, you know? My mentor once told me that we're like tomatoes. We never stagnate. We either get ripe or we rot. I think emotions fuel that. At least it has for me. Anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for sharing stuff about your story. I think it's cool seeing where you're at now and where you've been. If people want to follow your story, how would they do that?
I'm on Facebook and Instagram. So
Yeah.
Do that.
At what?
We can just toss it in the link in the video.
Yeah. So if you care about Eric's story and you got something from it, check out his Instagram or Facebook and just share what you got from it. Or you can hit him up with a question if you're dealing with something similar. But yeah, thanks for hanging out and talking with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
And if you guys have stuck around for the hour or so we've been talking, thank you. And we wish you the best and we love you.
Nice.
See ya.
Later.